nothing like a short analysis on a show that's well over a decade old, with almost everyone and everything there is to know already, so let's go. The amazing world of Gumball, and probably if you've clicked on this video, you've seen, has been renewed with a new series, promptly titled The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball. And in seeing this trailer and the clips going around, even the new title intro, it really gave way to something that always intrigued me, being someone that grew up with the original show, but not nearly as much as a lot of the other shows that aired at the time, but still something that was able to stick with me, that got revived when me seeing the renewal of the series. That intrigue being very outlandish and divergent art and animated style of the show, and as time goes forward, with style and animation being something that's played with even more so now. Seeing the new announcement of the renewal from the window view at least still seemed to retain that core differing standout element that separates from, well, most other things in the space, especially from a television animation sense. While going forward, we're going to be talking about very different use of common things you will see from the traditional animated show on Cartoon Network at the time, but it does have its fundamental similarities, which you can see in a basic rundown of the story of a family cast whose lives are filled with zany and surreal adventures that they sort of have to progress through day to day. At definition, a very simple 2-sentence explanation, and probably one the creators like Ben Buckelett had to make to Cartoon Network themselves, that actually on its own separated was what Cartoon Network really sought after at the time, though the original pitch was a bit different and tuned a bit to fit that bracket they were heavily into. But while being pitched, included a heavy emphasis on characters, something we touch back on deeper in another context, but characters from commercials that were rejected for their character designs. So that basically became the helm to the very different and well-known part of Gumball, being the very wide array of characters in the show. On an off note, this show really is a textbook great example of basic design of characters. And I mean the word basic in no derogatory fashion. This show excels in this regard, which really lends to more of its strengths and why most characters are memorable, with off-the-top examples allowing Forrester being a donut, but leads to the whole forest being a fast food menu, or even a criminal being a fingerprint. Just really on-the-nose type of ideas were explored and used where they can be applicable, because even still, not all have this IRL pun attached to them. As you may know, they can get pretty zany, but still that core design element of them isn't complex or convoluted, visually at least. And do I remind you, this was a show airing on Cartoon Network at the time, whose cast for shows typically wouldn't exceed 1 to 3, though in this regard, Gumball and Darwin themselves would fit this box, but still Gumball found itself on the less common side of having huge ensembles of casts that even weirdly are mostly always occurring, which these basic designs of them actually lets them stand out more, even if some are used more than others, because a single showing of them is more often than not enough to not let them escape your mind. Which in bringing up the characters a bit kinda lets me segment into the very thing that lets them move, being the animation of Gumball. So remember when I said I would go deeper into the characters in another context? Because there's really no other way to discuss them without mentioning the animation tied to them, and prominence on the word tied, because characters' whole designs goes all the way down the line to how they functionally move. Gumball and Darwin, the main protagonists themselves, are mostly done in 2D, same for the Wattersons family, but this more traditional form of movement was played with a lot more so depending on the episode. Other more permanent movement of characters, however, like this 3D dinosaur or the strange but fitting use of IRL captured scenes with this character, are a lot more heavily tied to their actual characters themselves, which these two characters are just the intro to Gumball's whole eclectic style of animation. While other animated shows even during this time on Cartoon Network, like a great example of Courage the Cowardly Dog's one-off use of IRL captured scenes, means it wasn't out of the norm to use these techniques. Even Gumball's use of IRL backgrounds with 2D and 3D characters and even stop motion ones, all collectively existing in a scene, is an uncommon mix, but not an entirely uncommon one. Shows like Flapjack utilized a lot of art styles, more keenly being the use of cell animation mixed with paper collage backgrounds while still using the tradition to the animation. Shows were a lot more willing to change the entire look of their art style if it meant the other would give a specific tone to the audience, which I think this reasoning could define the entire reason for Gumball's everything, to the base 2D look made with Flash and After Effects, to utilizing Maya for a good amount of 3D characters, stop motion being brought to the play for some scenes, Photoshop to live action use cases, even puppetry. All this chaotic mixing never gets convoluted, and not just in a visual sense. In my opinion at least, there's always order to this chaos, and that baggage is weighed a lot more on the writing or narrative side, something that deserves its own video, or even a deep dive into the long past paired 22-minute run of serial animated shows at the time. Just seeing 2D and 3D characters existing in the same space, looking completely different, moving completely different, and not be abnormal is something even current day anime struggle to nail at times. But the goal isn't for it to all come together to look the same, at least in Gumball's case. It would be a shame for all these creative mediums that typically wouldn't all be together, clash without knowing which is which is why I think tones is something that plays a major part for the amazing world of Gumball. Creating teams' whole choice of placing this animation or that animation, are much unlike any other animated show, is to give the audience a specific feel. But whereas others would swap that whole project visual change for more story elements to use within their animated style, a comedic scene, a sad scene, an angry scene. Both Gumball and other shows have these scenes. The difference for others is the animation is a foundation that really shouldn't be broke apart and rebuilt, much less for the lesser reasons Gumball does it. But it's that flipping of logic, not 100% of the time, of how to use a certain tone in minor or less plot pivotal moments that the frequent changing of the art style attaches itself to. Character designs can be coupled the same, which I think is just a long way to say they have absolute freedom to do whatever, whenever. Gumball's shifting of the art style is its art style. I think this show is probably one with a select few to have this many animated styles, at least to my memory. And we're saying that your mind could guess that means there should be even more that does this sort of unorthodox style. But I think that's what makes Gumball and any other show that does it unique. Watching any episode of this show is just an animated blender of blended together mediums, and that mixing, in my opinion at least, is pretty cool. Which also, in not spending my childhood majorly watching this show, but still be the thing that remains so clear in my head, really goes without saying. So here's the hope they nail this renewal, which if I had to bet, not really a betting man, I think they do. And seeing this style of this show in 2025 is quite strange because you wouldn't really too see these type of things. Shows a lot more today are a lot more 2D focused or 3D focused. It's quite strange to see this show gets renewed, but I really do like that it got renewed. And you know, especially coming off a video like Castlevania, which is a lot more darker and heavily 2D focused, to go into this show was really, really different. And I really do like to see this style be more of a thing. And that was a short analysis on or a revision of Gumball's whole style, if you needed that. But yeah, if you've watched this far, thank you. And if you've liked the video, and well, remember to have a good one.